Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, the political dragon here in our offices in the Bronx. It's December 9th, approximately 6 p.m., and we found something very interesting today. As we were doing our research, preparing for our interview with Andy Hoosier on public radio in Ohio, we ran into a very interesting article about World War III, about the 2024 election, about how it's going to affect your life, and also about what's happening with our colleges. It's a lot of information. We're going to go over it with you in detail in just a moment. But first, we do want to say that if this is the first time you are seeing our channel, we welcome you and we thank you for being part of our audience. We want you to know that every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out on all the social media that the internet overlords will allow to be able to hear your voice, because we believe in the First Amendment. It is not just an American principle. It is true for everyone in the world to talk about the politics that affect each and every one of our lives. And we want to hear your voice from anywhere in the world every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to give us your chats, your tweets, your messages, and your conversation about what's happening. We hope to see you this Sunday as well. I do a lot of research every day, looking at international news as well as domestic news here in the United States. Very often, what we see happening overseas, the conversation that's happening, doesn't match what the mainstream media has approved for the United States. And very often, key details are overseas instead of here in the United States. So we were looking at some of the international news. Deutsche Welle, DW News out of Germany, happened to have this one very interesting interview, and we wanted to take a moment to go over that. You see, it kind of instantly reminded us of something that we saw with Bill Maher. You may recall, Bill Maher recently mentioned during the entire controversy over former Harvard President Claudine Gay and her support of Hamas during this current conflict between ISIS and Hamas, and ignoring the fact that Hamas currently has 22 Americans that they are holding hostage, continuing to torture and sexually abuse them, and also ignoring the fact that Hamas killed 34 American civilians for no reason other than they happened to be there. And it was during that controversy that Bill Maher happened to reach out and tell everyone, as a former member of elite colleges here in the United States, don't go. Don't go to college or an elite college because they will indoctrinate you. That is their goal today. Colleges in America, and to an extent in first world nations, no longer is about inspiring thought, debate, discussion. No, it's about following a political ideology which more and more is not only progressive but leaning towards socialist and or communist. And that mindset is very apparent every time we see these individuals speak out. In particular, in this Deutsche Welle news interview. This interview was with Professor Gloria J. Brown Marshall. Now, she is a graduate of elite schools. She teaches at Vassar. She's taught at John Jay. She deals with constitutional law. That's really the sideline, though. That's the title that she uses that allows her to get access to media and international news media to hold interviews like the one we're about to cover right now. But who is Gloria J. Brown Marshall? Now, I don't know her personally, so I can only go by her bio and the information that's available about her online. But what we can very quickly see is she is an activist first. She's into intersectional politics, and she trades in racism. That's her bread and butter. Her ability to teach students is very much a secondary issue, and when she does teach them, she seems to take the same approach that we see with President Obama. It's politics first, indoctrination first, and everything else after that. You can just look at her bio and you'll be able to see that. She's a darling of Hollywood and the intelligentsia. Look, she's done plays, which no one's ever heard of. She's done books that focus on intersectionality, that focus on racism and feminism. She speaks out about feminism and racism exclusively. This is her forte, and occasionally she dabbles in talking about constitutional law from the framework of racism and sexism exclusively. And if anyone thinks that I am being harsh in my judgment about her based on her presence online, you only need to go online and look at the things she has spoken about. It is almost exclusively race, feminism, anti-Donald Trump, anti-Republican. It's very progressive. So I think it's very fair when I say she's a DEI specialist. She's an activist first, and everything else is secondary to that. And that's how she makes her money. That's her claim to fame. And she uses her title like a shield, which we often see with many on the left. She has a title, she's black, a woman, presumably a woman, so therefore she is unassailable. You cannot attack any of her positions, because if you do, well, then you must be sexist, you must be racist, you're some kind of ist or phobe. Fine. Let's go into what is it she actually had to say. To put this into context very briefly, we're starting at the beginning of her introduction, the first approximately 2 minutes that she's in the interview with the Deutsche Welle anchor, news anchor. I think it's very interesting what we see. This is what is being presented around the world as American academia, the view of Black Americans. This is how it's promoted. This is the message that is being sent out to the rest of the world. And sadly, in the case of Gloria J. Brown Marshall, it's an embarrassment. Let me show you what I mean.
U.S. presidential election. I'm happy to welcome back to the show Gloria J. Brown Marshall. She's a professor of constitutional law at John Jay College in New York. She's the author of numerous books on voting rights and race relations in America. Professor,
now I left out, she's, besides being a playwright, an award-winning playwright, she's also an author. Now, all of my critique has nothing to do with her ability as an entertainer. I don't care. And we want to focus specifically on the fact that she is a constitutional law expert. That is her field of study. What she's going to be speaking about has nothing to do with constitutional law. And that means she has no idea what she's talking about. In fact, in terms of international politics, I know more about this subject than she does. But let's go on.
It's good to have you back on the program. President Biden, I'm sure you were listening in. He was speaking to this long arc of history today. American democracy after the Civil War, American democracy in the polarized present. I mean, do you agree that the stakes are indeed that great? Are we talking about an existential moment for American democracy now?
Now, before she speaks, the anchor has set up the entire conversation. He's starting with a negative position that the 2024 election is dangerous, that there is a problem inherent in it. He is reinforcing the message from Joe Biden, who has been on a tour of America trying to demonize anyone who does not agree with him. If you believe in making America great, a positive statement, well, then you are a bad person. You are evil somehow. If you vote for Donald J. Trump, you are a bad person. You are evil. If you happen to be a conservative, if you happen to be a Republican, if you own a firearm, you are an evil person responsible for mass shootings throughout America. None of this is correct. None of this is accurate. But this is the way that the Democratic Party is walking into the 2024 election. Joe Biden has extremely low approval rates. Most Democrats do not want him to run. They do not want him or Kamala Harris as their candidate. But since they are stuck with him, this is how he is trying to motivate them. He is trying to demonize everyone else, and by demonizing them, calling them ist and phobes, then therefore you cannot speak out about it and you must comply. That is the message. And that message is being conveyed by the Deutsche Welle anchor as well in his question to start off this conversation. That's somewhat in the wheelhouse of Professor Brown Marshall, because she is an activist first, and she does trade in racism and sexism. So these are things that she is very much in tune with from her perspective as a progressive, and we'll hear what she has to say.
We certainly are. And unfortunately, the risk to democracy is not just a risk in the United States, because if Donald Trump becomes president again, he's already decided he's going to wreak vengeance on anyone who opposes him, especially the so-called enemies he already has in the government and anybody who didn't vote for him before.
So she's already started off the conversation with her feelings. This isn't factual. There is no evidence that she's provided. She isn't citing any example of what she's saying. Donald Trump is about vengeance. Where is the proof? Please cite an example of that. She doesn't. She doesn't highlight an exact quote that Donald Trump has said that would make you believe that. I believe she is trying to reference a joke that was made when Donald Trump was being interviewed by Sean Hannity of Fox News, where he said, "I'll be a dictator on day one and only for day one." That has been taken out of context by the left, saying he has said he will be a dictator without completing the joke, without putting it in context of the joke that was stated. Fine. So she may be referring to that, but she hasn't made it clear, nor does she provide the context that it was a joke and what the punchline of that joke was, that it would be for one day and only one day to enable him to shut down the border and end the open border policy of Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and the progressive left. So she's already set up a very interesting point of view, which has no basis in credibility. But in addition to that, she's now attacked Donald Trump on her feelings. And she's said something that actually is more appropriate for saying about Joe Biden. Joe Biden has said that if you are MAGA, well, then you are a problem in America. Donald Trump hasn't said that. That's something that Joe Biden is saying. Joe Biden is dividing Americans based on their political preferences and trying to demonize them if they do not agree with him. That isn't coming from Donald Trump. So again, we can see her bias, and she's losing credibility by the second. But it gets far, far worse.
But he's also going to join with other strong men, dictators around the world.
Donald Trump is also going to join with dictators around the world. Prove that. Please explain that. Give some clarification on that, because that doesn't make any sense. Again, it seems that she is misquoting Donald Trump as he gave a joke on Fox News interview. But what gives her an indication that Donald Trump would be aligning himself with North Korea or Cuba or China or Venezuela? There is no evidence of that. Nothing that he has said would make us believe that. Now, she may feel that way, and that's perfectly fine, but as someone who has been brought on international television to discuss Joe Biden's remarks, she seems to be way off of field and way outside her realm of credibility, which would be racism, sexism, intersectionality, and constitutional law. None of that has been addressed. So this is all propaganda spin on her part, trying to bolster Joe Biden while trying to demonize and destroy the character of Donald J. Trump and anyone who supports him internationally. Let's go on.
And create havoc around the globe. It will not just...
She says that Donald J. Trump, President Trump, would create havoc. Now, this is very interesting because we have a reference. We have something to look back on. Whether you like Donald Trump or not, I don't care. It doesn't matter how you feel about Donald Trump, the man. I could care less. What we do want to focus on is Donald Trump, the politician, the former president of the United States, has a history. He has a track record. We know what President Trump has done for 4 years. We do know that he bolstered peace in the Middle East. That was the Abraham Accords. He received 2 Nobel Peace Prize nominations because of that. We know that he was initiating or trying to establish an end to the North Korean War. We know that he threatened Putin and China and restricted them in their actions that since his departure have gone off the rails. We now see that there is a war between Russia and Ukraine. That happened first under President Obama and has continued now under Biden, but was on pause. It did not happen under Donald Trump. We see that under Biden, it was President Xi of China that then decided that then stated that he's going to invade Taiwan by force and take them over. And we have seen under President Biden, it is the militarization of Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and Europe as well. This doesn't seem to match up with what is being said. What havoc, if anything, under President Trump, whether you like him or not, whether you agree with all of his actions or not, he was a stabilizing factor in the world. He was a strong leader that restricted the actions of terrorist organizations like Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Iran, and other rogue nations in the world. That is a fact. It cannot be disputed. That factually was the case. So I don't understand why she's saying havoc. Again, these are feelings that she's expressing, her feeling about Donald Trump and what he might mean to the world, but it has no basis in fact based on what we have actually seen him do and what he has stated he will do. Let's go on.
Rest within the borders of the United States. There will be, I would say, perhaps World War III if he is allowed to join with other dictators and put in.
There would be perhaps World War III. How would Donald Trump start World War III? She's given no reason for that. She says that Donald Trump is a dictator, which has no credibility behind it. She says that his policies would create havoc for progressives because he isn't a progressive. He doesn't agree with their ideology, but that's true of anyone who's elected and doesn't believe in their ideology. That may be havoc for them from their ideological point of view, but that has nothing to do with whether or not it would be havoc for the American country and our relations internationally. And how would Donald Trump start World War III? This is a very interesting statement coming from a constitutional law professor, an individual who specializes in trading in race and sexism. None of that has anything to do with international politics that she seemingly knows nothing about. Let's go on.
In place the nationalist themes that he's already advocated in the United States.
I mean, that's quite a statement to make, Professor. I just want to ask you, when you say World War III, what war or what country would you see America fighting against?
Well, you start.
Okay. So let me stop right there. So Deutsche Welle's anchor correctly caught on to what I did. She made an assertion as if it were a statement of fact with no credibility behind it. She's just made an allegation, and we do know that, according to progressives, ever since the Me Too movement, if not before then, allegations equal guilt. Because someone has accused you of a crime, well, then you're guilty of the crime. It's the same thing that we see coming out of Colorado and in Maine, where President Trump has been accused of being an insurrectionist, but in fact, he has never been convicted of that. In fact, if anything, he has been exonerated. But the leftist ideology has punished him, removing him from the ballot in Colorado and from even contention in Maine because of the accusation. There is no guilt. And so she is following up in that. Now, he correctly says, well, you have to give some kind of credible basis for this. Who would Donald Trump be fighting in this hypothetical leftist idea of World War III? Would Donald Trump be starting a war with Ukraine, with China, with Iran, with Venezuela? Whom would he be fighting against in this theoretical World War III scenario that she has felt is true?
Start thinking about it when you go across the globe. You see the Philippines and what they elected. You see in Eastern Europe, the president.
So she said, because the Philippines, because Italy, Sweden, several nations around the world have elected conservative-leaning leaders, presidents and prime ministers, well, they're bad guys. That's the reference when she's saying Eastern Europe and the Philippines, conservative individuals have been elected, not progressives, not left-leaning individuals, but right-leaning individuals. And so that equals nationalism. That equals 1930s Germany somehow. I don't understand the connection there. That doesn't seem to be accurate. There is no credible threat in that. They're just not progressives. But it seems that according to Professor Brown Marshall, if you're not a progressive, well, then the only other option that is available to you is you must be some kind of fascist, which doesn't make any logical sense. And as a college professor, especially one who deals with laws, she should know that's not logical or credible. But yet she's making that case. Let's go on to hear, again, we're still waiting to hear who is Donald Trump going to be fighting against? How is he doing this World War III? Who is he fighting?
That are elected there, when you begin to see that it didn't take much, as you know, this is your history, for one country to gather with another, where there was only, for example, Japan.
So now she's referencing World War II. She's referencing the Axis powers, which has nothing to do with Donald Trump. It has nothing to do with World War III. But she is trying to reinforce this feeling of fascism, that anyone who is not aligned with her political views, her political ideology, her feelings, well, they must default and become like 1930s Germany. And so she's highlighting the Axis powers, and that, well, because 1930s Germany was able to get several nations to have the same ideology, and because they all had similar ideologies, therefore World War II, which isn't why World War II happened, that's not accurate. It's not historically accurate. And we can understand why she's not a history teacher, because she's absolutely not credible here. She's trying to make that illusion. It isn't working. Let's go on.
And Italy and Germany to create World War II. So if you think about that, it doesn't take a number of other countries, but if they are geographically, strategically placed, and they're...
It doesn't take a lot of other countries if they're geographically and strategically placed. That makes no sense. Again, it doesn't answer the question that was asked of her. She was asked a very specific question. She made an allegation that Donald Trump would create World War III. The anchor correctly asked her, how? How is this going to happen? Who would Donald Trump be fighting? Her answer is, well, he's on the right, and everyone on the right is a fascist, so fascists would come together and it would be a world war. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Besides the fact that it discounts the connection between the United States and our closest ally, the United Kingdom. It discounts our relationship with Canada, with France, Germany, with many nations, first world nations in the world. And by the way, we fought with them against the Axis. So again, her analogy doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Is she saying that the United States, Sweden, Italy, many of these nations, presumably the United Kingdom, which have right-leaning governments, are all going to come together and decide to have war against who's left? China? that we're going to declare war against China because they're communists and that's World War III? Is that what she's alluding to? Because it's not very clear. But we do know that China is militarizing. They are preparing for war. They have made that statement very clear. They're going to forcibly invade Taiwan. We know North Korea is actively firing off nuclear missiles or nuclear-capable missiles, rockets, on a regular basis, more than we have ever seen before. They most recently were firing off artillery shells threatening South Korea, and they have been threatening Japan as well. We know what's happening with Ukraine and Russia. So perhaps she thinks that Donald Trump is going to go to war with Iran or Russia or China, but she's not making it clear why he would do that. Not to say that there aren't reasons or ways that that could happen, but she's not giving any of them. She's not making it clear. And it seems that she's supporting, if that is the correct reference that she's making, well, then she's supporting the communism of China. She's supporting the anti-LGBT, anti-woman sentiment of the Ayatollah of Iran, a fanatical religious leader who believes in supporting terrorism and global genocide of any and everyone that doesn't agree with his point of view. She wants to side with Putin. I'm not sure that's what she intends to mean, but because she doesn't know anything about international politics, apparently, that is the illusion she seems to be giving, which would make, if I were a leader of a foreign country, if I'm individuals in foreign countries outside of the United States, I would be concerned for America continuing down the progressive path, because it seems that the progressives are aligning themselves with some of the most radical and dangerous countries in the world at this time. I don't think she understands what she's saying. I understand it's her feeling, and she's entitled to whatever feeling she wants. And I'm sure that she has never been assailed. No one's ever questioned her feelings in the echo chamber of intelligentsia and Hollywood that she travels in. I'm very sure that the producers and Hollywood stars, the members of Harvard and John Jay, they all agree with whatever it is that she's saying, because she's black and a woman, a feminist, and she uses the race card. So, of course, they would agree with her. But anyone outside of that very small bubble have issues, especially anyone who is aware of international politics, especially as they have been going on since World War II. She has no credibility here. She has no idea what she's talking about, and her answer makes no sense whatsoever. She has completely avoided the question that she was asked, and instead is spouting gobbledygook about as well as Kamala Harris, just running at the mouth with nothing that is being said of any value whatsoever. But let's give her some more time. Maybe she'll get somewhere.
Animosity to democracy is as strong as Donald Trump's. And he has looked and reached out to these dictators. He's studied them. He's actually talked about the fact that he doesn't believe in voting rights. He believes in his supporters.
Donald Trump doesn't believe in voting rights? He's actually fighting in courts right now about voting rights. It's the Democrats that took away voting rights from American citizens. In Colorado, the Supreme Court of Colorado, 4 Democrats versus 3 Democrats, that took away the right of American citizens not only to vote for the candidate they want in the primary, but also to remove the ability to write in any candidate they wish, separate of approval from the government. So that's Colorado. They took away people's voting rights, took away their choice. In Maine, they equally took away people's choice, where they can't even write in Donald Trump, or anyone else for that matter, that isn't approved first. They took away Americans' rights. And Donald Trump is fighting to give Americans the ability to have that right, to have him to write in his name, or anyone else for that matter, as that's what the precedent would be. So it doesn't seem to make sense. She doesn't seem to know what she's talking about. which again should not surprise us because she's not an expert in election law. She's an expert in racism and sexism and intersectionality and progressive propaganda. She's an activist, first and foremost. So it makes sense she doesn't know what she's talking about, and what she's referencing is actually backwards. Again, let's give her a chance. Maybe she's going to finally address who would Donald Trump be going to war against.
Alone. And if he doesn't win, then there's something wrong with the mechanism we call a democracy. I'm fearful that other people in other countries think this is just an American problem. It's not just a problem for the United States. Donald Trump isn't just a problem for the United States. How is Donald Trump a problem for the United States? He may be a problem for progressives. That's a very different thing. The progressives are a splinter faction of the Democratic Party. Socialists, even a further splinter of even that. So we're talking about splinter groups within one faction of the United States. 40% of Americans are independent. They don't have any political organization they are part of. Approximately 25% of Americans are aligned with the Democratic Party. About 25% are aligned with the Republican Party. So the majority of Americans aren't even close to being aligned with progressive ideology. So what is she talking about? It doesn't make sense. It's a problem for the United States. Well, we were given this same rhetoric in 2015, 2016 from the very same progressive leftists, these elitist academics and Hollywood, saying the world would end and Donald Trump would destroy America. He didn't. Whether you like his policies or not, he didn't destroy America. And what we have seen since that time is America is worse off today, empirically, mathematically, factually. The United States is in a worse position than it was under Donald Trump or even under Barack Obama. It is worse off today than in the past. So I don't understand what she's talking about. It sounds like her feeling that her progressive ideology will not continue to be indoctrinated into students and the public as a whole, that's her problem, that her ideology will be challenged, that it will not continue to grow, that it will not be allowed to fester in America, and therefore she finds that to be abhorrent, that is her biggest problem, that she wants more progressives in charge and more of the progressive ideology superimposed onto Americans rather than anything else. It's a very different argument than what she is making or that she is talking about. And it has nothing to do with World War III. We've been talking about that on this channel for years. Literally years we have been talking about this. We have been talking about the fact that it will not be World War III. It will be 3 regional wars. And we have gone into explicit detail covering this for years with updates as we have seen China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia take various actions and make various announcements about their military position and their future. She has no idea what she's talking about. And she is counting on the fact that she is a woman, that she is black, that she is a member of the intelligentsia, and part of an echo chamber of progressives that no one will question her. But I am, because she makes no sense. Let's go on. She still has a chance to tie this together, to show us who is Donald Trump going to go to war with. That was the question she was asked, in case you forgot. Trump is a problem for the world if he gets in office again.
I want to go back in time for a moment with you to the U.S. Civil War, which ended in 1865.
Okay. So at this point, because this could go on forever, the anchor at Deutsche Welle moved on to other news, to the main issue, which was talking about Joe Biden and his use of racism to try and prop up his 2024 re-election hopes, which is something that Professor Brown Marshall has some expertise in. talking about racism, using the race card to promote politics. So that's something she is an expert in, and that's where the conversation then goes on with. But I think it's very clear she has no credibility. She destroyed all of her credibility. She is relying on the fact that she is a woman, that she's an academic, that she is black, to cover up all of the holes in her logic, because nothing she said makes sense. Outside of the fact that it's her feeling, and if she said, I feel, fantastic. She didn't. She said these things as if they were facts. She said these things as if these predictions, these horror stories she has envisioned for the progressive movement are things that would affect the rest of the world that do not share her values or her ideology. We need to call these people out when they do these kinds of insane things. She is not speaking for America. She's not speaking for, hell, even Democrats for the most part. She's speaking for a very small bubble that have a very big voice. And I'd be happy to debate her about international politics because she seems to not understand it. I wouldn't debate her about law. She supposedly knows about law. That is her expertise. I wouldn't question her about that. But when it comes to international politics, in a heartbeat, because she has no idea what she's talking about. None whatsoever. She couldn't even answer the basic question that she brought up as an issue. Who would Donald Trump be fighting against in World War III? She doesn't know. And she had to cover it up because no one has actually told her who he would fight. Because this talking point that she is parroting has no credibility. There is no enemy that exists except progressives, at least in their own minds. And they believe the world is progressive, even though it clearly and absolutely, empirically is not. Often, people look at, well, that's a professor. They must know what they're talking about. This is someone who is educated. They wrote a book. They wrote a play. They've been acknowledged by others in those fields. They must be brilliant about everything. She's made it very clear that's not true. Not even close to true. She has no idea what she's talking about. We should not allow her to sit on her laurels and believe that she actually has any credibility where she doesn't. She's embarrassed herself. And in embarrassing herself on international news, she's embarrassed the United States, as well as her academics and progressives. She's embarrassed our country, and she should apologize for that. But I don't think she will. What do you think?